Through the eyes of the newsreel camera, we bring you an affectionate look at the way we used to live in the 1940s. Those were the days. The 1940s were dominated by the Second World War. For 6 years, the island of Britain was under siege. As soon as darkness fell, every light had to be switched off. Newsreels of the time tried to dispel the darkness with a light touch.
Take, for example, this house in the suburbs, the house of a well-known Mr. Twerp. He switches on a reading lamp when he wakes up, quite forgetting that he removed the blackout before he went to sleep. When he gets up, he wanders from room to room, reading the paper and waking the butler and one thing and another, and the result outside is simply appalling. Mr. and Mrs. Twerp are particularly liable to forget the back of the house. A light from the kitchen can be seen in the sky just as easily as one in the front.
It was clear that this war would be different from the last. The very real fear that London and other major cities would be bombed forced the government to organise the evacuation of hundreds of thousands of children to the safety of the countryside. The decision would bring chaos and anguish to ordinary families.
These mass movements of our children are the greatest tribute in the world to the British way of life. Even in the midst of the storm and stress of battle, in the midst of the greatest war effort this country has ever known, we don't forget the safety of our children, on whom the future of our race depends.
Among the evacuees were the most famous children in the land, the royal princesses Elizabeth and Margaret Rose. The government shrewdly recruited them to the propaganda effort in 1940.
Thousands of you in this country have had to leave your homes and be separated from your fathers and mothers. My sister Margaret Rose and I feel so much for you, as we know from experience what it means to be away from those we love most of all. To you, living in new surroundings, we send a message of true sympathy, and at the same time, we would like to thank the kind people who have welcomed you to their homes in the country. My sister is by my side, and we are both going to say good night to you. Come on, Margaret. Good night, children. Good night, and good luck to you all.
Look out! Look out!
The war began badly for Britain. The expeditionary force in France found itself outgunned and pushed back to the French coast by overwhelming German enemy forces. A flotilla of small ships made a successful last-minute bid to rescue the trapped Allied army. The result was a brilliant example of the British skill of turning a military disaster into a tale of triumphant escape.
Wireless operators are at their posts. Each ship is filled with the men of the BEF and of the French army in Flanders. They are on their way home from the hell that is Dunkirk. Since these pictures were taken, we have all heard the full story from the Prime Minister of how the Royal Navy, using nearly 1,000 ships, has brought back nearly 350,000 men. Here in pictures is the triumph that turned a major military disaster into a miracle of deliverance. Here in one staggering shot, the Allied armies come out from the shore. That one amazing picture symbolizes the miracle of deliverance, which in the words of the Prime Minister was achieved by valor, by perseverance, by perfect discipline, by skill and by unconquerable vitality.
The unsung heroes of the British war effort were the housewives. With their husbands away in the forces, they had to run the home and the family on their own at a time when the very essentials of life were hard to get.
Rations, points, coupons, the daily problem of meals, with food that was scanty and dreary, the never-ending search for little luxuries, the pleading with shopkeepers. There was no escape from the dull, endless monotony of the household round. Years of washing up, of scrubbing and cleaning, of patching and making do. No medals, no mentions in dispatches. The women made the best of it, and when there wasn't enough to go round, it was the women who went without. Always something to do. For many, these were the best years of their lives. They should have been years of being taken out and amused and entertained. But instead, there was nothing but waiting.
Why not get together with your friends and form a make, do and mend group? Then you can all help each other.
In the 40s, long before the cancer scare, Britons were enthusiastic smokers. and wartime cigarette shortages hit hard. Cigarettes were considered a necessity, not a luxury, in 40s Britain.
What a comfort a smoke can be. Some artists find they can't paint without a puff. The film star would be lost without the added glamour of a cigarette. Some girls will go to any lengths for cigarettes, and 30 cigarettes means a total length of 7 feet 6. And look at the waste of cigarettes, I mean. Here are some more interesting facts. No wonder he hasn't got any left. And just as people have different tastes, they have different wastes. Here are some of the wasters with their wastes. And here's what you smoke in feet on the basis of 40 cigarettes a day, each 3 inches long. A lifetime as a human chimney. My word, how you've traveled. Today we're only too pleased to be able to do this. That reminds me, anybody got a pin? We present the family model. When father says puff, we all puff. But it is rather tough on the cigarette.
Cut your lawn and pawn your iron cross. Oh, run, I don't run, I don't run.
Hitler planned to invade Britain once the rest of northern Europe had been conquered. But first the Germans knew they had to win control of the skies. For 2 months in the late summer of 1940, they attempted to destroy British air bases, but despite terrifying odds, the RAF kept them at bay.
By superb heroism, our Air Force inflicted smashing blows on the much-vaunted Luftwaffe. Never in the history of human conflict did so many owe so much to so few. We know now that the mass raids of September were to precede actual invasion, but the aerial vanguard of the Nazis lay a twisted mass of metal on our shores. So overwhelming were the defeats meted out by the RAF that space had to be found to accommodate the tons of wrecked enemy aircraft.
The Battle of Britain may have been won in the skies, but it was widely feared that all it had done was delay the inevitable invasion. With every able-bodied man now conscripted into the regular army, Britain's defences rested on the old soldiers and middle-aged amateurs of the Home Guard.
Night and day these men guard our lines of communication at home, ensuring the safe transport of troops and munitions on their way to ports of embarkation, and they're on duty wherever a vital service needs protection. And each of them has the satisfaction of knowing that he's releasing a younger man for duty overseas. Healthy open-air work breeds healthy, wide-open appetites. The country is in safe hands with the Home Defence Battalions on guard.
After their failure to destroy Britain's air force, the Luftwaffe bombed the cities, ports and industrial areas of the country. For the first time in history, civilians became military targets. The Blitz was Hitler's attempt to destroy both the war effort and the morale of the British people.
Nazi airmen, without a shadow of doubt, could have picked out other targets of military importance. But the Royal Air Force and our ground defences were inflicting heavy losses on the attacking air armadas, as many as 99 enemy raiders being brought down in one day. In their rage at these blows of their air might, the Nazis threw off all pretense of confining themselves to military targets, and the following pictures show that bombs have been scattered over London without any distinction of military objectives. Any war the Hun has ever fought has been aimed chiefly at the civilian. The coward always attacks the weak.
Even the royal family were not spared the horror of the Blitz. After the raids on the working-class East End of London, the German bombing of Buckingham Palace showed that there were no class distinctions in this war.
By this further deliberate attack on the lives of our King and Queen, when 5 bombs fell on and around the palace, the home of our beloved sovereign and his consort is again damaged. One bomb crashed through the Queen's drawing room, while others fell in the quadrangle. Within a few yards from where the King and Queen were sheltering, the royal chapel was struck. Tearing through the roof, the bomb completely wrecked the altar and hurled 20 tons of debris into the basement. We thank God that their majesties were unhurt.
The Germans believed that by targeting the royal family, they would inflict a devastating blow on British morale. The reverse was true. The King and Queen refused to leave their palace home, and in their famous walkabouts, they identified themselves as sharing the same hopes and fears as their subjects.
To Fulham, their Majesties bring a cheery word, and the Queen especially a friendly smile. As they walk with difficulty among the wreckage, they're greatly moved by the wanton havoc wrought by the Hun. At intervals, the royal party halt to have a word with ARP workers, demolition squads and firemen who've done such splendid work at so great a risk. Having had their own home bombed, their Majesties speak with understanding and sympathy to those of their subjects who have also fallen victims to Nazi savagery.
It was not just London that suffered in the Blitz. The cathedral city of Coventry was almost totally destroyed in a single night.
The martyred city of Coventry. Amid the wholesale wreckage of a noble city, crushed by the force of hundreds of tons of bombs, the steeple of her one-time beautiful 14th century cathedral looks down on a scene of indescribable desolation. 1,000 citizens of Coventry were killed or maimed by the Nazi disciples of slaughter, who kill mostly for the joy of killing and destroy mostly for the joy of destroying. These are scenes of the butchery at Coventry. Hastening to be with his people of Coventry in their hour of adversity, the king was an inspiration to the stricken but courageous inhabitants. They came through the ordeal magnificently. This is their greatest hour.
Please, don't travel in the Russia.
All citizens were encouraged to protect themselves and their families from enemy bombs. Anderson shelters made of corrugated iron were popular, but it was not impossible to stay in your own home during the air raids.
In this demonstration test, the Anderson shelter successfully withstood the blast of a 500-pound bomb, even though the building close by was wrecked. And here's an actual shelter that was bombed. It had the right amount of protection at the sides of 30 inches of earth and rubble, top 15 inches, and what was just as important, back 30 inches, and the people in it were uninjured.
For those without space for an air raid shelter, there was plenty of advice on how to protect yourself and your family.
To protect a window, fix an old door firmly across the lower half, inside and outside, first removing the glass, and fill the intervening space with earth. An earth barricade about 30 inches thick will protect your front door from blast. A well-filled bookcase placed before a window gives good protection against blast and bomb splinters. Rig up one room in your house as a refuge room. A coal cellar is a good refuge. Make it comfortable, you may have to stay in it a long time.
For those in the capital who had to leave their houses to find sanctuary, the London Underground stations provided shelter for more than 170,000 Londoners during the Blitz.
At 71 stations in the London Underground system, tube trains are bringing refreshments to platform shelterers. Over 120 canteens are being installed. 48 of them are already operating. When the provisions are unloaded, the canteen attendants set up shop while their customers lay down their beds for the night. There may be a blitz going on hundreds of feet overhead, but down below, tens of thousands of shelterers are going to make short work of 250,000 cups of tea and cocoa, to say nothing of buns, cake, apples and chocolate. Supper is served. Mind your feet, folks. Here come the nippies.
Be prepared was a constant slogan during the war years. Britain feared a gas attack, and gas masks were issued to every citizen. Training in the use of the masks was a regular part of life and work for ordinary folk.
Gas mask on 5 minutes, please. Gas masks on 5 minutes, please. Stick your chin well out. Do you find that you can work quite well in your mask?
Yes, quite easily.
And it's quite comfortable, is it?
Yes, you soon get used to it.
That's good. Now don't forget to wipe your mask after you've used it. Try the inside.
Even Britain's babies had their own tailor-made protection against gas attacks.
It looks something like a diver's helmet. And now the Perfect Baby's gas mask is being fitted with the Perfect Baby. In goes a few weeks old youngster, and the lower part of the apparatus is strapped round his body. He takes it all lying down.
When food is short, you oughtn't to treat your bread as unimportant.
The country needed feeding in the 1940s, and women went into the fields to replace the men who joined up. The land girls became a feature of the British countryside. Women in the cities were also encouraged to do their bit for the war effort. They willingly took up the challenge of keeping British industry going. There was no room for glamour on the factory floor. Long hair was thought to be a threat to production.
Believe you me, a hair on the head's worth two in the machinery.
The heir to the throne set an example to Britain's young women. Princess Elizabeth, now 18, trained as an army mechanic.
She has been learning to drive and maintain all types of motor vehicles. When the training centre was visited by the King and Queen and Princess Margaret, they found Princess Elizabeth in overalls working on the engine of a Red Cross lorry. After watching other girls at work, the King returned and jokingly asked the Princess, "Haven't you got it mended yet?" The Princess Elizabeth, Honorary Second Subaltern, ATS, is now a competent mechanic and proud of the fact.
1943 was a pivotal year for Britain's 8th Army, fighting Rommel's crack battalions in the North African desert. After months of dispiriting defeat, the Desert Rats, under their new commander, the inspirational General Montgomery, now had the German Afrika Korps on the run. The final showdown was the set-piece battle of El Alamein. Churchill celebrated the victory in a famous wartime speech.
Rommel's army has been defeated. It has been routed. It has been very largely destroyed as a fighting force. This is not the end. It is not even the beginning of the end. But it is perhaps the end of the beginning.
After 18 months of preparation, Allied troops, bolstered in men, equipment and morale by the entry of America to the war, were ready to set foot in France again. The D-Day landings on the Normandy beaches on the 6th of June 1944 were the largest armed invasion in history.
From the coast of Britain, the floodgates are opening to release the tide of Allied soldiers. A great curtain of secrecy is still drawn as invasion troops embark, and our Prime Minister makes a last-minute visit to the assembled armada. The first of a series of landings in force is how Mr. Churchill describes the operation. Author of the Victory V sign, he watches over the great preparations. While all this is going on, there goes out to Europe by radio the warnings issued by Supreme Headquarters. The alert is sounded not only in France, but in Norway, Belgium and Holland. The underground movements are given instructions, and to the people of France, there comes the voice of the Supreme Commander, General Eisenhower.
Great battles lie ahead. I call upon all who love freedom to stand with us now. Keep your faith staunch. Our arms are resolute. Together we shall achieve victory.
Despite heavy Allied casualties in the early days of the invasion, the British public recognized that this was the first step on the road to victory in Europe.
Eagerly they absorb every line of the rationed information as it comes to hand. The news is good, far better than they dared to hope.
So it's hands, sneeze, and books a daisy. Wrap all the germs in your handkerchiefs.
Captain Clark Gable, now stationed in Britain as gunnery instructor in the American Air Force, has said goodbye for the duration to £1,500 a week and signed a new contract with Uncle Sam.
The star of the hit movie Gone with the Wind had been recently widowed when the newsreel cameras caught up with him in 1943.
And here's where our real job begins. We're in the Graduate School of Gunnery now, learning it in combat, trying to put it onto film, trying to report it in a way that will help the gunners back home to know what to expect when they go out on their first mission.
The Lancashire comedian George Formby was a huge star in Britain during the war. Along with other British stars such as Vera Lynn, he brought emotional relief to both civilians and battle-weary servicemen.
Special Constable George Formby has another part-time occupation. Slipping a smock over his uniform, George goes into action with the Herbert Morrison Brigade in the war against waste. A choice selection of rags, bottles and bones goes for a song.
After the success of the D-Day landings, the German army was steadily pushed back on two fronts. In May 1945, British and Russian troops converged, and defeat was clearly looming for Hitler's forces.
Lüneburg Heath, Germany, May the 4th, 1945. The instrument of Germany's unconditional surrender was signed. 7 clauses, and no mere scrap of paper. Clause 2 is tapped out by Morse, the signal for the ceasefire, which reads, all hostilities on land, on sea, and in the air by German forces to cease by 0800 hours.
It has been a privilege and an honor to command this great British Empire team in Western Europe. We have won the German war. Let us now win the peace.
Cheers bridged the English chant. Britons, impatient for the official signal to celebrate, jumped the starting gun on Monday night. And for days afterwards, Londoners packed city streets and squares.
Once the war in Europe was won, Britain had to prepare for the return of its troops to civilian life. Jobs were the first priority.
A mammoth robot is at work, preparing with mechanical precision the post-war fortunes of millions of fighting men. For 24 hours during the past 3 years, this mammoth work has been going on to provide statistics for the speedy release from the forces during the interim period following the defeat of Germany, when all military efforts will be concentrated towards the defeat of Japan. When the last European all-clear is sounded and releases can begin, the walkie will set the pace of gradual demobilization.
Many of the men had little to return to once they'd been demobbed. Enough new clothes for life on Civvy Street was an important start.
A complete new outfit, the coupon clipper's dream. Civilian experts are there to help, just in case the Irk has forgotten how to put on a civvy waistcoat. There's everything here from pinstripe suits for budding businessmen to light checks for country gents.
You can make sure of greens for next winter if you plan your sowing now. This Ministry of Agriculture leaflet tells you how.
But the war still raged in the Pacific, and with the Japanese bent on fighting to the last man, the fateful decision was taken to drop the world's first atomic weapons on 2 Japanese cities. Hiroshima was chosen as the first target.
Down among the ruins, Emperor Hirohito surveyed the smashed wreckage of Japan's industrial cities before his final decision to surrender.
Revealed here at ground level is a trail of devastation such as the world has never known. A single bomber, one bomb exploding 1,500 feet above the target, leaving no crater.
When General MacArthur accepted the Japanese surrender, the war was finally over for the thousands of British prisoners held in Japanese camps.
We are gathered here, representatives of the major warring powers, to conclude a solemn agreement whereby peace may be restored.
The end of the war brought the end of a political era. Voters rejected their great war leader, and a massive landslide swept the Labour Party into power.
It was the first general election for 10 years, and experts early estimated a record poll.
Mr. Churchill flew back from Potsdam with his daughter Mary on what was to be almost his last day as Prime Minister. Mrs. Churchill was there, as always, to greet him. Though defeated, Mr. Churchill is acclaimed as a great war leader.
The socialist government of Clement Attlee promised the nation a program of rebuilding and radical reform of social policy.
Never before have the electors shown clearly their desire that there should be in this country a Labour government carrying out Labour's full policy.
Rationing continued after the war, but there was some relief for families. In 1946, the first bananas in 7 years arrived in Britain.
the first cargo of bananas that has arrived at this port since the war.
This first shipment of 5 million goes to children under 18 living in southwest England. A committee of banana tasters make a dockside test.
Isn't it lovely?
Hey, you look like an indigestion sufferer. Well, what are you doing about it? Oh, tried most things and the pain still comes back. Well, you need new Settlers. Yes, Settlers. New hospital-tested treatment for indigestion, Settlers. By a new scientific process, Settlers combine 3 powerful antacids more effectively in one tablet for quicker, longer-lasting relief.
The day's vegetable shopping was a matter of seconds. One toot on the horn and the travelling shop rolls up. And it does make things just a little bit easier for women with homes to run.
Bomb sites, many converted into allotment gardens, became a feature of post-war Britain. Kids enjoyed playing in them, but more importantly, they were a much-needed source of food for city families.
Of course, the earth isn't quite right yet. They're still getting out of it lumps of stone and brick, all that's left of the buildings that once stood there. But they don't mind a bit of hard work. There's plenty of rivalry among the kids to grow the best flowers and the biggest vegetables. But like gardeners everywhere, they're always ready to help each other. Mum's glad about the garden too. Not only does it keep the kids out of mischief, but it saves her poor old feet from having to stand in queues for vegetables. These little land girls and land boys keep their own livestock too, and get a special kick out of being able to feed the rabbits on homegrown produce.
Allotments were an obvious way to recycle bomb craters. Finding new uses for air raid shelters presented a different challenge.
When our air raid shelters were built, they were our #1 priority. Now the shelters have done their job, the question is, what's to be done with them? If you have a better idea for using up your shelter, don't keep it to yourself, spread it abroad. But whatever you do, please don't leave the shelter to rust away in the garden. If you can't use it, somebody else can.
Since 1943, there had been thousands of US servicemen stationed in Britain. With smart uniforms, double the pay of their British counterparts, and oozing self-confidence, no wonder British women fell for them in droves.
Although it looks rather wild, there's a rhythm and method about jitterbugging that only those who dance it can appreciate. If you want the best jitters, the Rainbow's got them.
The American ship Argentina left for the USA in January 1946 with 626 GI brides on board.
They waved their goodbyes happily enough, but when the camera wasn't looking, quite a few of them shed a tear. First big surprise was the ship. For the Pilgrim Mothers of 1946, the Argentina is turned into a nursery ship, fitted out with everything from napkins to the pink and blue drop-side cots called Houston cribs, after the American colonel in charge of this noisiest company ever to be under military command. Mothers wanting a stroll on deck can leave G.I. Joe Jr. in the playroom. And just to remind them that their ship is a bit of America, there are bananas and 5-course meals aboard and a shop where they have no use for coupons. In Britain's biggest exodus since the Pilgrim Fathers sailed 300 years ago, the Argentina leaves on her sentimental journey.
After the war, people in Britain and America generally felt goodwill towards Russia, however repressive its political system. After all, throughout the war years, they'd been fed Allied propaganda, constantly reminding them that the Russians were our friends. The man who almost single-handedly convinced the public of the real threat of Russian communism was Winston Churchill. In 1946, he coined the phrase that would echo round the world when he said, "An iron curtain has descended across Europe."
Take the Black & Decker, add one of the many attachments, and put power into your hands. Black & Decker offer a complete electric home workshop for only 30 shillings down. And remember, whatever the job, it's quicker and better with Black & Decker.
On New Year's Day 1946, the first commercial flight since the war left London's new airport for South America.
This proving flight starts off from Heathrow
which will be the future civil airport of London. And it takes off from the finest runway in the world.
A whole generation would be introduced to the heady delights of air travel. But for most Britons, holidays still meant the seaside, and the first chance to relax since the end of the war.
Maybe there weren't many Easter eggs, either chocolate or shell, but it's holiday just the same. And as many town-weary folk as possible flocked seawards to get sand in the eyes, and what an eyeful. Spring got into the blood for Easter 1946, and Britain took a real holiday break. And over at Blackpool, under the tower, things were humming along from pier to sands, from Cocklestalls to Blackpool Rock.
The post-war generation of kids was introduced to Punch and Judy.
Mr. Punch and his wife may be just dolls of rag and sawdust, but to the children they're real people.
National sport was reborn in 1946. The first test match against India since the war was at Lord's.
Skipper Wally Hammond flipped a bright new florin, and the Nawab of Patari chose to bat. And for 30,000 watchers, the thrill started when Surrey youngster Alec Bedser beefed in with his terrific Morris Tate-style bowling. It's his first test, and he comes out with the bowling honours. India's left-hander Gal Mohammed soon went. But the visitors' worst blow came when Aikin caught the Nawab in the slips. 6 down for 87.
Both Indian and English supporters applauded the players, many of whom had seen active service. In that same summer, the first derby to be held since the war was celebrated by huge numbers of British racing fans. But no sooner had British sport resumed than the familiar moans about the country's sporting decline began.
Last winter, Don Bradman and his men kept the ashes. Golf. America holds every British golf title. Racing. French horses have won this year's 1,000 Guineas, Oaks and Derby. Tennis. Frenchman Petra took home the Wimbledon title. It was different in 1936. Fred Perry beat Germany's Von Kram, and there was Dorothy Round, twice a Wimbledon champion. And we're left with football, the one bright spot. It was good to see Stanley Matthews run rings round the rest of Europe team at Glasgow. We won this match 6-1. At soccer, Britain still leads the world. The day must come when triumphs in other sports will come back.
Peter Robinson had a size for you, 5 feet to 6 feet 2. Oxford Circus, Leicester Square.
Princess Elizabeth used the occasion of her 21st birthday, celebrated in South Africa, to dedicate her life to the service of her subjects in every corner of the empire, now known as the Commonwealth.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service and to the service of our great imperial family to which we all belong. But I shall not have strength to carry out this resolution alone unless you join in it with me, as I now invite you to do. I know that your support will be unfailingly given. God help me to make good my vow, and God bless all of you who are willing to share in it.
A house-building program was desperately required, but even more urgent was temporary accommodation for the homeless. The thousands of redundant Nissen huts were one simple solution.
How would you like a floating home? You can have a humdrum job in factory or office and be your own admiral when you get home. And rent? Well, it's just a few bob mooring charge. And this family has a permanent busman's holiday at home. House-hungry ideas men have picked out the infantry landing craft for one of their biggest experiments. The landing craft are converted into modern 5-roomed houseboats. Total cost is just under £900 for the fully furnished CB floating bungalow.
Prefabs, comfortable, simple houses that could be put up fast, went up everywhere.
Aluminium bungalows are being erected here at the rate of 1 every 35 minutes on a former Roman encampment. Before the houses arrive, brick and concrete slabs are put down to receive their water mains and electricity connections are laid on. These are the only preliminaries. After that, the house seems to spring up, and before you smoke your third cigarette, the curtains are going up in the living room. A team of 30 men do the erecting. This group has been on the road for 12 months, in which time they've put up 1,000 houses. If this pace could be kept up on a big enough scale, we might eventually see the end of the country's housing problem.
Some prefabs were bigger and smarter than others. Young couples could watch their new house being put together in just one day.
The first thing to do, of course, is to visit the building site. And if we're not mistaken, that's a complete house on the way. The parts are unloaded and checked. There are exactly 189 of them, and they're erected on sites that have water, gas, electricity, and drainage services laid on. Each building unit is, in effect, a sandwich, consisting of 2 sheets of asbestos cement filled with wood wool. There are 5 rooms, including bathroom, kitchen, and second bedroom, which leads off the kitchen. The kitchen is equipped with wash copper, fridge, and electric cooker. As an alternative to the fire, there's an immersion water heater. Tables that fold and cupboards that hold are other amenities for saving space and providing it. It may be only temporary, but it's certainly a comfortable home, thanks to units.
The housing programme had 2 ambitions: to rebuild bombed homes and to clear the slum areas of Britain's cities. In 1946, the government launched a plan to create a series of 8 new towns around London, one of which was Stevenage.
This is a momentous day in the history of Stevenage. Today we are taking the first big step towards the implementation of the Greater London Plan. The government proposes to place the whole of its resources behind the building of this new town.
Stevenage is to be transformed from a country area into a bustling new town of 50,000 people, part of the Greater London project, which includes a £230 million rail expansion scheme.
What's the first name you think of in biscuits?
Huntley and Farmers, of course. Everyone likes them.
After the war, Britain began the inevitable process of shedding itself of much of its empire. On the stroke of midnight, on the 15th of August 1947, more than 500 million Indians celebrated their independence.
Outside the Constituent Assembly, crowds again broke through the police cordon. From the balcony of the building, Pandit Nehru, India's first premier, urges the crowd to let the procession move through. Earl Mountbatten's car was surrounded by thousands of wildly cheering people.
In the winter of 1947, temperatures plummeted to minus 26 degrees centigrade. Britain was brought to a virtual standstill by the heavy snowfall. When the ice thawed 3 months later, the British economy was crippled as well.
This is how snowed-up Britain looks from the air. The worst spell of weather for 50 years. We hope it'll be 50 more before we get another.
Fred Fernley Limited. You get super after-sales service at Fred Fernley's. Really super.
The engagement of Princess Elizabeth to Prince Phillip of Greece brought a ray of light to a Britain still suffering from a post-war hangover. A few months later, on the 20th of November, the glamorous young couple were married.
2 greys draw the Irish stagecoach. Inside, Her Royal Highness Princess Elizabeth and her father. And now the solemn service begins. In this moment, charged with great meaning, the people of Britain and the Commonwealth joined. They listened and remembered. And now they are man and wife. Following the bridal procession came the bride's father and mother, and behind them 5 kings, 5 queens, and 8 princes and princesses.
In the post-war austerity years, the royal wedding brought a romantic glow to a public that needed some good news.
For the people who had come from afar, the wedding was a family wedding for the entire British people. From the palace balcony, Elizabeth and her husband waved to the cheering crowds. Excitement was at its peak as the King, the Queen, Queen Mary and other members of the royal family came out to join them. Seldom has a bride and groom received such a tumultuous expression of goodwill.
That's careless, though this could happen to anyone. And this you can't escape, but wise men wear trousers made of Burtex, Burton's new stain-resisting cloth. Burtex-treated pure wool worsteds are stain-resistant. Burtex, another reason why you can't beat Burton tailoring.
British women in the late 40s would go to desperate lengths to achieve the fashionable new look.
First, it's the straitjacket for that figure-of-8 appearance. The French call it a guépari, meaning wasp. The Americans a cinch. A last look at the superstructure before we show you a new look dress by Richards in utility material. Think it would look good on you?
Clothes rationing was still in place in 1948, and the government introduced multi-purpose utility clothing.
Utility furs are well in the news. This short leather coat, ideal for all kinds of hardware, especially in the country, will be on sale for about £24. The leather has been waterproofed by a special process. If you want something smarter for town wear, all you have to do is to turn it inside out, showing the sheepskin side. Here's a white Lincoln lamb in the same range with tartan lining. There will also be long coats at a few pounds extra, such as this beaver lamb. An American opossum jacket, this. This is African antelope from the Belgian Congo. This is ocelope, made from antelope stenciled to look like ocelot. Among the most popular will be the Jeanette. Yes, you're going to look smart in your utility fur.
This beautiful sandal in black satin, richly ornamented with gold, reminds us of the lovely things which came to us from China in the years of plenty. Very different from this streamlined model in grey suede. A clean-cut, comfortable afternoon shoe in calf, green, red or tan to match your suit. All these shoes, designed by Edward Rain, look very expensive, but they're price-controlled and within the reach of all. It looks as though you will soon be able to forget the old utility models, doesn't it?
British women performed miracles with their meagre clothing coupons, but they still kept an eye on fashion.
From Paris came the latest autumn styles. Calf-length skirts have won the battle of the hemline. Wistfully envious, British women can only lengthen their utility frocks. For evening wear, Paris has gone in mainly for black and white designs. Meanwhile, British women will have to go on clothing themselves in their imagination while awaiting the day when they return to pre-war elegance.
The 14th Olympic Games, the first to be held since 1936, were awarded to Britain and took place in London in 1948.
As the five-ringed Olympic flag is raised, 7,000 pigeons are released to carry into distant lands the message that the nations of the world are joined in friendly rivalry upon the field of sport.
The Olympics were a chance to show that life was returning to normal, but inevitably they would be known as the austerity games. New heroes would emerge on the track.
A 26-year-old Czech engineer sets a new Olympic record for the 10,000 meters, and the standard for the London Games is set by Emil Zatopek.
Ask for youngers, get younger every day.
The Empire Windrush carried a new wave of migrants from the colonies to Britain in the summer of 1948. They came seeking jobs and a new life.
In Jamaica, they couldn't find work. Discouraged but full of hope, they sailed for Britain. Citizens of the British Empire coming to the mother country with good intent. Prodded by public opinion, the Colonial Office gives them a more cordial reception than was at first envisaged. Many are to be found jobs. Some will go into industry, others intend to rejoin the services.
Now, why have you come to England? To seek a job. And what sort of job do you want? Any type, so long as I get a good pay.
As new homes began to be built in their thousands, Britain's designers and manufacturers produced modern gadgets with which to furnish them.
At last, the perfect domestic servant. Never answers back, never wants a day off, and never walks out on you. It's the latest thing in automatic washing machines, and it does several jobs in one. By using the clothes washing tub, it will cope quite happily with the week's laundry. Or if you want to have the dishes washed up without getting your hands dirty, you can turn the same machine into a washer-up in a few moments.
Down to earth like a sack of potatoes, we show you a woman in her grimmest hour. But now meet the housewife's hero, inventor Philip Phillips of Kensington. His army days on cookhouse fatigues taught him the terrors of spud bashing, and this is the result. A pair of comfortable rubber gloves with an outside surface of rough stone. And this is all you do. An ex-private becomes a public benefactor with an idea that will have every cook just rubbing her hands with joy.
Dry hair, never won fair lady. Use Brill Cream. See the instant improvement. Your hair becomes vital, supple, living. Your scalp tingles with new health. Use Brill Cream. Brill Cream puts life into dry hair.
The Labour government began a revolution in health and welfare. The National Health Service was born in 1948, but not all of the medical profession supported the idea.
Critics of the new charter for professional people and patients centre on Harley Street, home of British medicine. The government's plan is described by Labour MP Dr. Hayden Guest.
The first thing to know is that the whole service, the doctor in his surgery, the doctor in your home, or the bed in the hospital if you need to go there, will be free. There will be no more doctor's bills. The immediate benefit to children will be very great. Measles, whooping cough, the cold on the chest that develops into pneumonia. Those are the causes of death in children. Early treatment will save many thousands of children's lives. Let me remind you again what I said earlier to you. There will be no more doctor's bills.
British industry was working flat out to recover from the war, but most production was for the more profitable export market rather than for sale at home.
Orders pour in from all over the world. Total overseas sales are expected to exceed £70 million. The new cars are a great advance in looks and performance. By modernising body styles, home manufacturers have answered long-standing complaints that British designs were too conservative. Low prices and low petrol consumption are now likely to outstrip foreign competitors. While foreign buyers can get immediate delivery, Britons wait anything up to 3 years.
British designers had to improvise to appeal to foreign buyers.
Something new in motor car construction. The convertible car. The back opens and the metal hinged roof falls back into place. It's all done in half a minute. Just another way in which British skill is making life easier for travellers. A couple waiting for a lift may be a familiar sight anywhere in the world, but it isn't every day you see a rickshaw pull up in a Manchester street. And this is the motor rickshaw, a new British invention for export to the Far East.
Short of this and that we may be, but Britain is still out in front with new ideas. Necessity keeps on mothering inventions, and ex-serviceman Mr. Atkinson of Barnet hasn't let the loss of both legs keep him at home. He's away in the first hand-controlled 2.5 horsepower runabout, especially built for war-disabled men. A new model for the road in motoring's 50th year.
Fray Bentos soups are quality soups.
Fray Bentos!
Determination that the future would not be scarred by war led to the foundation of NATO in 1949 by Britain and her anti-communist allies. US President Truman outlined his hopes for the alliance.
The simple document, it had have existed in 1914 and in 1939, supported by the nations who are represented here today, I believe it would have prevented the acts of aggression which led to 2 world wars.
Acknowledging that security is indivisible, 12 nations combine in a united front from the Tropic of Cancer to the North Pole. An attack on one is an attack on all.
In 1949, Berlin was a divided city inside Soviet-controlled territory. The Russians had attempted to take control of the whole city by cutting off its western supply line in April 1948. A never-ending stream of supplies was flown into the city from the west and had kept Berlin alive. At midnight on May 11, 1949, the Russians lifted their siege.
After nearly 11 months of Cold War, another start is made. 25,000 tons of fuel and food, doubling the record total of a day's airlift, head for Berlin. As midnight nears, tension mounts at the British frontier control post. Familiar with the old Russian habit of changing their minds when it suits them, seasoned campaigners could not quite grasp this new mood of cooperation. On the stroke of 12, the barrier goes up and a British jeep leads the race into Berlin. So reopens the lifeline into Berlin. After 11 months of siege, the West is again linked with the East. It was this railroad that began the dispute that led to the blockade. According to the Russians, the lines and bridges needed repair, and they were closed to the West. This was the front they presented to the outside world to cover their bid to force Britain, France, and America out of the German capital. The West's determination to stand firm, plus the weapon of the airlift, beat Soviet tactics and called their bluff. Now, with the normal supply route open again, a new life begins for Berliners.
In 1949, British families, especially the children, were rewarded for the years of austerity that they had endured. After almost a decade, sweet rationing came to an end.
At last, after 9 years on personal points, Britain follows up the heat wave with the sweet wave. As 0 hour approaches, the dawn patrol gathers outside the confectioners. Early birds get a special reward. Money boxes are rifled, and even father joins the queue. The longest memories find it hard to recall such days of plenty. Look out, Dad, that stuff makes even grown-ups do childish things. The good news that draweth old men from the chimney corner and children from play puts the fun back into being young. Tots' mouths have watered a whole lifetime for this great day. For years they've been cheated by the hard facts of world economy from the unrestricted orgies once accepted as the birthright of every child. But now hundreds and thousands are backed by the billion. Sherbet and rock, gobstoppers and aniseed balls, lollipops and chocolate bars.
One of the most turbulent decades in British history was ending on a joyful note.
And now for the tummy ache of a lifetime.